Morrison, Colorado, 1960. On a bridge just outside town, two cars were stopped and two drivers confronted each other. One was the heir of an American beer dynasty. The other, an escaped criminal looking for a big score. What happened between them would result in a deadly brew of gunshots and bloodstains, a ransom note, a massive manhunt, and a media frenzy that gripped the nation. It's the history of murder, and I'm your host, Clare O'Donoghue. On the morning of February 9th, 1960, everything had been normal for Adolph Coors III. Adolph, known to everyone as Ad, had ridden around his beloved ranch after having his morning coffee. Then he got into his car and headed to work. But that's when things stopped being normal. The usual road was under construction, so he had to take a back road over a one-lane bridge. And on that bridge, he disappeared. Philip Jett, the author of The Death of an Heir, Adolph Coors III, and the Murder That Rocked an American Brewing Dynasty, said the job Ad was headed to that day was predestined.
He was the grandson of the founder of the Coors Brewing Company. It was Adolph Coors Jr., Adolph Coors III. He was CEO and chairman of the board of the brewing company.
In 1960, Coors, the largest single-site brewer in the world, was run by Ad and his two brothers.
His brother, Bill, was the president, and so the two of them ran the company. And Joe, the other brother, he ran the porcelain company that Coors has just across the creek from the brewing company.
As the oldest of three sons and the first grandson of the founder, he was a natural choice to head the brewery. But in other ways, he wasn't.
He didn't like beer. He was allergic to beer. He preferred ranching over sitting at a desk. And in fact, he was going to retire early and just ranch. He'd already bought a ranch out around Morrison, Colorado, south of Denver. So in 1960, it was really remote. That's why they had these dirt and gravel roads and one-lane bridges and that sort of thing.
Before we continue, please remember to leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to our channel. It will help us continue to make new content. Now, back to the story.
On that chilly February morning, 44-year-old Ad completed his morning workout and had coffee with his wife, Mary, while their four children were still asleep. Then he did some chores around the ranch.
You go out, check the troughs and the water and that sort of thing in February when it might ice over, do a few things, and then you'd go into the office, which was not that far a drive.
The drive to the brewery in Golden was only 12 miles away. Ad put on a tan baseball cap, his favorite navy blue jacket, and got into his station wagon. Normally, he would travel along a major highway, but parts of it were closed due to construction. So Ad took a rural road that ran over a bridge that crossed Turkey Creek. But on that bridge, a yellow car was blocking the way. The hood was up, and the driver, in a brown fedora, seemed to need help. Suddenly, the sound of gunfire ricocheted throughout the Turkey Creek Canyon. It was 8 a.m. Meanwhile, at the brewery, Bill and Joe Coors were in their office, preparing for their usual 10:30 meeting with their brother. But Ad never arrived.
He didn't show up for work, which he never missed work. And if he did, he'd call in. And, back then we didn't have cell phones, but you'd call from wherever you were, the gas station, the grocery store, the feed store, wherever you were, and let them know, hey, I'm going to be a little late. I'm over getting some feed for my horses or whatever.
By 10:45, Ad's secretary began calling around, trying to find him. She called the Coors warehouse in Denver, the Coors porcelain factory. She even spoke to Mary at the ranch. But no one knew where Ad was.
Then a call came into the office from the Colorado Highway Patrol. saying that they had found his vehicle abandoned beside a bridge, and they wanted to know what the problem was. Bill took the call, and he was smart enough to know this is not the way Ed operates.
No, it wasn't. Ed Coors would not just disappear. He was a responsible man, Mr. Reliable, and a pillar in the community.
He was a nice guy, family man, 4 kids at home, and wife he married, Margaret, who's famous in Colorado as well. I think her grandfather was one of the first governors of the state. And you'll see Grant on a bunch of buildings and signs and things out in Denver, as well as Coors.
The marriage wasn't just of 2 prominent families. It was of 2 people very much in love. And everyone could see what Mary found in Ed.
He was a nice guy. You know, he was a tough businessman, but he was a nice guy. I never ran across anyone who said anything bad about the gentleman, as far as his demeanor or how he treated the workers.
In fact, Ed and the other members of the Coors family were fixtures in Colorado, where the patriarch, Adolph Coors, had started his brewery back in 1873. Coors, a penniless brewer's apprentice, had stowed away on a ship from Germany and discovered that the clear waters around Golden, Colorado were perfect for making beer.
Coors was Golden and Golden was Coors. Very small town. In fact, the factory hired more people than populated the Golden at the time. A lot of these people had grown up with the brothers, played sports in school with them. They knew them all.
At 6 foot 1 inch, Ad was the shortest of the brothers, but he was physically fit, weighing 185 pounds. And he was an avid skier. One of the reasons Colorado became noted for that sport was due to Ad, who actively promoted skiing throughout the state in the 1950s. But while Ad was the athletic one, his brother Bill was kind of the brains of the family.
Very smart guy. Went to Princeton, got his engineering degree in chemistry, I believe, and he ran the day-to-day operations, unlike Ed, who oversaw policy and that sort of thing. Bill, he was known for doing a couple things. He was the first one to develop cold pasteurization. He felt that if you heat up beer, it loses some of its flavor. So he came up with cold pasteurization using filters. And Coors had a company spinoff called Coors Container, which made cans, and they sold those aluminum cans to other companies. Joe was more into the porcelain plant, and he was really into politics back then and later in life.
The brothers all had different titles in the overall company, but they ran it together, since their 74-year-old father, known as Mr. Coors, had handed them the reins. He didn't give up ownership, though, and the sons owned no stock, but took salaries. Mr. Coors had raised his children to be disciplined and hardworking, and as a parent, he was strict and unsentimental, as Bill once told a reporter.
My father believed if he showed affection, it would spoil me and my brothers. I never got a word of approval, nor did my brothers. A perfect job was expected of you. Anything else was underperformance.
Mr. Coors insisted that the brothers work together as a team and had a surefire way to handle arguments.
Our father would not tolerate dissension. If there was a difference of opinion, he insisted we sit there and argue things out until we reached unanimity. We were then bound by the decision.
Mr. Coors made sure his family did not flaunt their wealth and status. Maintaining a low profile was good for business. Prohibition had almost wiped out the company, and he feared it might someday be restored. Also, back in 1933, one of Mr. Coors' close friends, the son of the wealthiest man in Colorado, was kidnapped and held for 2 weeks before being released for a ransom. So the Coors style was to look and behave in as low-key a manner as possible.
You have these 3 brothers that are running a big company in the United States, and they share an office. And in fact, their metal desks like butt up against each other. They're all in the same room. They dressed much like a worker, very casual. They weren't that flashy. Yeah, they had wealth. They had nice things. They belonged to a lot of country clubs, but they had regular cars and that sort of thing. Their father really drove that into them, not be, as we say now, a conspicuous consumer. I think a lot of people liked them for that.
But his man of the people ways clearly hadn't protected Ad, because by the afternoon of February 9th, his family came to believe he had been kidnapped. And it was easy to understand why. The scene at the bridge. Bill and Joe joined the state patrol there and saw Ad's abandoned car. A milkman making deliveries that morning had found the car with the engine running, the driver's side window down, and the radio playing. He'd honked the car's horn and waited for the driver to return. When no one came, the milkman pushed the abandoned vehicle off the one-lane bridge to the side of the road so he could continue his route. Then he called the police. Now, hours later, with investigators scouring the scenes, they found some disturbing signs.
There's blood at the scene. There's scraping on the bridge. There's a fedora. There's a cap. There's as glasses that are broken also now in the water. And it looks like there was a struggle.
A huge search began with 73 county sheriff deputies called in, along with state patrolmen and volunteers. Bill later told the Denver Post,
"This is all so incredible, but it's obvious someone waylaid him. I don't think he had an enemy in the world. And he carried very little money. The family is baffled. All we want is Ad's returned, and we will appreciate anything that anyone can do to bring this about."
The next day, the FBI arrived. Mr. Coors personally spoke to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover and was assured this case, codenamed Cornap, would be their top priority. But the FBI's early presence didn't sit well with the local authorities, particularly the man heading up the initial investigation, Sheriff Art Wormuth.
The FBI came in, thought everybody locally was buffoons. And Sheriff, he was a war hero from World War II, and he had a deputy that had been in naval intelligence, so they weren't complete buffoons.
Throughout the search for Ad and his abductor, there were clashes between the sheriff and the FBI, mostly about who would be the face of the investigation and who would deal with the media. And there was a lot of media, especially as the case began to make headlines.
Sheriff Wormuth was always seeking the media's attention and leaking things to the news like people talk about today. He was doing that. And so the FBI just kind of cut him off. You know, they're like, don't talk to this guy. They told the family, don't talk to him.
But the family, especially Mary, was desperate to talk to anyone who could help. Because 2 days after Ad disappeared, a ransom note addressed to Mary arrived demanding $500,000 in exchange for her husband's release.
The kidnapper sent the ransom note the day of the kidnapping, and it was sent before there was any news of the kidnapping having broken on the news or in the newspaper, so they knew it was legit. Told them to put an ad in the newspaper signaling to him that they had the cash ready, and then he would contact them about where the drop would be made.
The ransom, $500,000 in small bills, equals about $5.4 million today. It would be shared, it seemed, by several people, since the ransom note stated, quote, "We have no desire to commit murder. All we want is that money," unquote. Mr. Coors, without hesitation, made the arrangements to get the cash and told reporters,
"I am dealing with crooks who are in business. They have something I want to buy, my son. The price is secondary."
When a reporter asked him about treating his son's kidnapping like a business deal, Mr. Coors replied,
"That's what it is. I cannot be emotional about this."
He is thinking just as he had done his entire life. It's just everything's black and white. It's just a business transaction. They want money. I've got something to sell. He wants to buy him. I want my son back. And he just viewed it very coldly in that respect. But that's just who he was.
Ad's brothers took after their father. Only 24 hours after he disappeared, Ad's brothers went to his lawyer and asked about his will.
I try not to beat up on the family, and it's a different time, and they're conservative and business oriented, and they just they're, I don't know, paranoid. They're just, there's something, they're always worried about something. And I felt like, and so they wanted to go in there and make sure everything's ready. There's not going to be a problem, nothing we don't know about, no, girlfriends or anything.
There was nothing. Ad was exactly the man he appeared to be. Mary and her children were definitely not like the Coors family. They were not looking at events from a business perspective. Mary couldn't eat or sleep. She was so consumed with fear. She was terrified about what might be happening to Ad. Their 4 kids, ranging in age from 18 to 10, were also scared and confused as they went to stay with Joe's family, while they anxiously awaited news about their father. Ad and Mary's son, Adolph IV, known as Spike, was 14 at the time. He later recalled how the kidnapping changed their lives.
We had an ideal family and were living the American dream. We had the home in the mountains, wealth, social success, and parents who loved us and took time to let us know their love. My life was almost everything a boy could want. Then, on February 9th, 1960, our world was ripped apart.
There's a lot of fake kidnap calls and letters coming in. Mrs. Coors would have to answer the phone several times a day just for fake kidnappings. The FBI would go out and track these people down and charge them with extortion. So the sad part was that she had to be available, and she had to listen to these people that are trying to make money off her husband's kidnapping, and she's trying to filter out the real person and deal with them. It was very tough emotionally and mentally processing all of that. It was like a slow torture, after you go through that.
Days passed, then a week, then 2, and still the instructions about where and when to deliver the money did not come.
The family was waiting, and saying, we're ready to pay. Where are you? They never heard from the kidnapper again.
With nothing but silence from the kidnappers, Mary couldn't cope. And as time went on, everyone around her began to notice.
She was not handling it well. She started hitting cocktails more often, drinking at home and that sort of thing. And that became a problem, which told me she really loved her husband.
While Mary agonized over Ad's kidnapping, it seemed to her that the rest of the Coors family was moving on. In March, Mr. Coors called a board of directors meeting, something he hadn't done in a while. He and the brothers began to divide up Ad's duties and settle his financial affairs. Mary worried that she and her children were being isolated from the family, and that with her husband gone, her sons would eventually be cut out of their rightful place in the company. And she felt especially hurt that during this horrible ordeal, the family did not shut down the brewery, not even for a day.
What may have seemed cold, they just continued on with their business. And Bill and Joe, it was their family business, was their personal business. And so our employees have no right to be part of this at all. We don't need to talk to them, we'll give them a day off or anything like that, have a memorial for the company employees.
Actually, many of the Coors employees were concerned that the kidnappers might turn out to be brewery workers, especially some of the union members. The company had maintained tense relations with the unions over the years.
They had had some pretty nasty conflicts with the union a year or two before. And in fact, the National Guard was called in to deal with that. And, fights, threats, broken glass, all that sort of thing going on. It was pretty scary. And so it was natural for the authorities to think, well, this may have something to do with the unions, because there was such a nasty clash between the two a couple years earlier.
I don't think Ad had an enemy in the world. Revenge isn't part of this. If it had been Joe or myself, then maybe I could understand it.
But the entire town and community was fearful that if it is a union man, it could blow the union right up and would give the Coors a really good excuse just to say, look, you kidnapped, killed my brother, whatever. We're done with you guys. Get out of here.
As the days went by, unbeknownst to Mary and the family, investigators were consumed not with finding Ad, but locating his kidnappers. Though they refused to acknowledge it, they had pretty quickly reached the conclusion that Ad was never coming home.
There was so much blood on the scene of the bridge, the people in the know knew that he was probably dead, either before he got into the car or just soon afterward. But they're still going to operate under the assumption that maybe he lived somehow. They're trying to keep Mary's spirits up.
But if the search for Ad was essentially over, investigators were hot on the trail of his kidnappers. And they had a very big clue. The day Ad disappeared, authorities had questioned family, friends, and neighbors about any suspicious activity they had seen in the area. And several people, including Mary, mentioned seeing a strange yellow car repeatedly parked near the ranch in the weeks before the abduction.
I grew up as a kid out in a very remote area, and you knew who your neighbors were. You knew what cars they had, what trucks they had. You'd see them. If you saw a car that didn't belong, you took note. And you're like, what are they doing? And so if you got a yellow car on top of that, and they come back, and they come back, and they come back, then you're like, what is that? He just sits and parks. He just sits, what's he doing? Kind of thing.
In fact, one eyewitness who spotted the yellow car and thought the driver seemed a bit strange had written down part of the license plate. He didn't have all the numbers, but he knew it was a 1960 Colorado plate. And from that, the FBI was able to track the vehicle and get a name: Walter Osborne. That name and the description of the car was sent to police departments all across the country. And on February 17th, investigators got a break. A police department outside Atlantic City found a yellow car that had been set on fire. It was registered to the same Walter Osborne. The FBI sent one team to New Jersey and another to Osborne's Colorado address.
And then they go to his apartment. Then they find out from the landlady, oh yeah, he took off, the day after the kidnapping, and so they start to piece it together.
During a search of Osborne's apartment, investigators found leather cases used to hold handcuffs. And even though the apartment had been carefully cleaned, they found another important clue on a discarded paint bucket.
They find one fingerprint that led to his identity, and then they find that he had escaped prison in California, and then they had his real identity. It wasn't Osborne, it was Joe Corbett Jr. He was using his stepbrother's first and middle name, Walter Osborne. It's funny because his landlady noticed that when he first started using it, Osborne didn't have an E, and then later on it did have an E. If you're going to pick an alias, you need to spell it consistently.
The 31-year-old Corbett had used a lot of aliases in his life, which had a lot of criminal activity. But it had begun with such promise.
He started out at University of Washington. He was from Seattle and did very well. And he actually was admitted to Berkeley, and he was pre-med, I think. And he was a Fulbright scholar, and everything looked bright. And then his mother fell off a balcony at home, and he turned.
Corbett had apparently been working on the balcony's banister just prior to his mother's fall and was simply devastated by her death. Afterwards, he dropped out of school, and his life changed completely. In 1950, he stole a car and shot a hitchhiker to death during a botched robbery. He spent a year in San Quentin, but was transferred to a minimum security prison, from which he later escaped in 1955. He fled to Los Angeles and then Colorado, where he kept himself afloat by doing small-time robberies. Corbett also took great pains to make sure that everyone around him knew how intelligent he believed he was.
He kept telling everyone he was going back to college. He wanted people to know he was smart. He wanted people to know he had been to college. Because at this time period, a lot of guys, blue-collar guys especially, nobody's going to college that much like they do today. And so that was something he was very proud of. But he had something, as they say, wrong with him. He had been diagnosed in prison as borderline schizophrenic, narcissistic, and all these other things.
Not only had Corbett become a dedicated criminal, but he was a confirmed bachelor who had a pretty dim view of women. He reportedly told a friend,
"Women aren't to be trusted. They're dirty, disagreeable, expensive, and worst of all, can't keep confidential information to themselves."
Once Corbett had settled in Colorado sometime around 1957 or 58, he began putting together his abduction scheme. He later admitted he had a long-time obsession with the famous Lindbergh kidnapping. Corbett got a job working at a paint store where he often told a coworker that he was planning to pull off a big job, and he began stalking the man he believed would bring him a fortune in ransom money. Add Coors.
And he had watched him while he was living in Denver, and then started watching him anew out in Morrison, Colorado, on the farm, the ranch. And so just waiting for an opportune time, very patient.
The construction on Highway 285 in February 1960 gave Corbett what he thought was the perfect opportunity to grab Ad Coors. The well-known beer baron would have to take a detour on his way to work across a lonely rural bridge. But based on the crime scene evidence, investigators believed Ad did not cooperate with Corbett's plan. He had put up a fight, and that, they assumed, probably cost him his life. Afterwards, they figured Corbett, having lost his hostage, had gone on the run.
He didn't have a plan B, really. He had his plan. He thought it was a great plan. And, how could it not work kind of thing. He didn't plan for what happens if something goes wrong.
On March 30th, as FBI geologists examined the mud and dirt on Corbett's yellow car, the FBI put him on their 10 most wanted list. J. Edgar Hoover called him the most wanted man since John Dillinger, and promised that he would soon be apprehended. But apparently Corbett had escaped apprehension. What investigators didn't know was that he'd already left the country. He had fled to Toronto, Canada, and gotten a job as a lab tech. He spent the spring and summer there trying to blend in and rebuild his life. Then, on September 11, 1960, everything changed, both for Corbett and for the Coors family. All because of a shocking discovery back in Colorado.
There's a dump, and Corbett would go there and practice shooting, which is something people did. And months later, this pizza delivery guy goes up. He's just a kid. He's 20, 21. He goes up there to shoot. And as he's walking through the woods down to a different level of the garbage dump, he runs across some nice shoes and nice pair of pants with belt, and he hears things jingle in the pockets, and he finds coins and a pocket knife, and then he comes up on a piece of key ring that has Adolf Coors' initials, AC the Third, on it, and he knows immediately, and so he runs and brings back the posse, the FBI and the local police, and they start scouring for the rest. It starts getting dark, but they start finding bones and that sort of thing. And then they come back the next day with this big search party, and they scour the entire hillside, and putting flags for each bone they find or article of clothing and taking photos.
Mary and the family were immediately notified. But it was only when a skull was discovered nearby that dental records could positively confirm Ad Coors had at last been found. Tragically, investigators did not locate all of Ad's remains.
He had been devoured by wild animals, and just, there was gnaw marks on the bones, and some animal had carried his head away, which even added to the trauma that the family had to deal with.
Years later, Ad's son Spike would recall how that horrible discovery affected his family.
7 months after his disappearance, my dad's remains were found in a garbage dump near Denver. In the meantime, my family had fallen into a deep hole of hate. Mother especially allowed hatred for Joseph Corbett to consume her life. In that hatred, she turned to the only crutch she knew: alcohol.
News about the discovery of Ad's remains hit the papers immediately. This was now not a kidnapping, but a murder case. And for some who had known Joe Corbett, the fact that he was wanted for murder was no surprise. A childhood friend of Corbett's named Dr. Philip Huffman later recalled that when Joe was about 12 or 13, he'd wondered what it would be like to kill someone.
He rents a red Pontiac convertible in Winnipeg, this big, long Pontiac with the fins and all the chrome, and very noticeable car. And he writes a bad check on his Toronto bank account in Winnipeg. So now the FBI, they go to Winnipeg. And where's the most likely place for them to go from there? Vancouver.
It also helped that Corbett had asked the rental car worker for directions to Vancouver. This self-professed smart guy was making a lot of mistakes and leaving a clear trail for the FBI to follow. Which they did. They went to Vancouver and told authorities to be on the lookout for a bright red Pontiac.
This Canadian Mountie is briefed by the FBI and about this red Pontiac, and he's like, I think I've seen that car out in front of a hotel here in town. And so they go, and sure enough, that's when they captured Joe Corbett. He was not expecting them. The story was he had asked for the delivery of a typewriter. And so the FBI, when they got there, they thought, okay, this would be our hitch. We'll pretend we're delivering a typewriter. But they said, they just knocked, and he answered. And he's standing there, and they said it looked like he just posed for the wanted poster. He looked exactly the same as the wanted poster.
It was October 29th, 1960, when the FBI and the Vancouver police finally arrested Joseph Corbett Jr. He did not resist. In fact, he made a pretty damning statement about himself.
I'm your man. I'm not armed. I give up.
And so they used that in court to say, see, there was sort of an admission saying, I'm your man. Well, why would he say that otherwise than to be admitting guilt?
The news of Corbett's arrest went nationwide. The credit for the capture could have been shared by all the investigators, but there was still lingering tension between Sheriff Wormuth and the FBI.
And there was another funny story between the sheriff and the FBI. And it was so blatant on the FBI's part because the sheriff leaves Denver to go pick him up. He's got the arrest warrant from Colorado. He goes to Vancouver to pick up Joe Corbett. And the FBI says, okay, we'll have all the paperwork and everything ready for you in the morning. Come back in the morning. So when he comes back in the morning, he learns that during the night, the FBI flew him back to Denver on their own so that they could have the photographs on the front of the newspaper, the FBI bringing him in rather than the local sheriff. The sheriff, he wanted the glory, and he was mad at the FBI, but what he didn't understand was that J. Edgar Hoover liked glory too.
With Corbett in custody, the Coors family now awaited the trial. They were certain he would be convicted, and Mr. Coors told reporters what they hoped would happen after that.
This is one of those instances where capital punishment, an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth, should apply.
Mary Coors agreed. She wanted him executed. But at that time, in order to have a convicted man executed in Colorado, there needed to be one of two things: an eyewitness to the crime or a confession. And investigators had neither. No one saw what happened between Corbett and Ed Coors on the bridge. And Corbett never confessed, and for the rest of his life, maintained his innocence.
They didn't really have any direct evidence. It was all circumstantial. It was him driving around, scoping out the area. It's him leaving his apartment the very next morning. It's him having talked big to some coworkers that he had a big score coming up. Just things like that. He was a bungler. He does his surveillance out in the country in a yellow vehicle people are not used to seeing. He keeps his original license plate on the car, which people know, and just on, and then when he escapes, he burns the car in New Jersey, which only alerts authorities to look there because they didn't know where he was at that time. Finally, with all this circumstantial evidence, closed the case on him.
On March 18, 1961, Joe Corbett's trial began. Prosecutors presented all the evidence that they believed strongly pointed to Corbett. In addition to witnesses that had spotted the yellow car, the FBI matched dirt from underneath it to samples taken from the Golden area. They traced the ransom note paper to a type that Corbett had purchased in Denver. They even learned he had bought a typewriter that matched the model they believed had been used to write the note.
Showing his bloody clothing and, his bones and all this stuff. I mean, today you have objection everywhere. But they were, building this case.
Then it was the defense's turn.
Well, there was no defense. The defense didn't put on evidence of any kind. They took the tactic. Bill Erickson was a very bright guy. He was the defense attorney. He decided he was going to attack the case procedurally because he knew he didn't have the facts. He had 103, I think, different issues with the case. I mean, he was throwing everything at the wall, and of course they were all denied.
With their motions repeatedly denied, the defense team had limited options. Corbett himself never took the stand, but his team did try to cast doubt on his involvement.
Because they were throwing some other things out there, like, there was a fingerprint in Ed's truck that could not be identified. There were other cars seen in the area, not just his car. So they were throwing these other things out there to kind of muddy the waters because they just need reasonable doubt. They need one juror to have a reasonable doubt.
On March 29, 1961, the jury reached a verdict. Corbett was found guilty of murder in the first degree and sentenced to life in prison.
I do not think that Joe Corbett intended to kill Ed Coors, and it was only when Ed broke away on the bridge, they were after the struggle and took off running for his vehicle, that he was shot. I don't know when the gun was drawn. I don't know if Ed didn't see the gun and just thought, okay, I'm done fighting, I'm going to run for it. Because I'm thinking if he'd seen the gun, he probably wouldn't have. But who knows? If Ed had just gone along with him, then he might have lived.
But who's to say?
Joe Corbett, he was a very dangerous man. Why didn't he just shoot in the air? Because I'm thinking I would have stopped if I'm Ed if he'd shot in the air. Why did he have to shoot him twice in the back? So I'm not sure that Ed would have survived in any event. But Joe Corbett reacted to what he saw as his ransom escaping and just killed him.
3 months after the trial, Ed Coors' remains were cremated and scattered over Aspen Mountain during a small family service. Mary and her children tried to resume their lives, but everything had changed. And as she feared, it would not be her sons that would ultimately take over the brewery.
Bill and Joe's kids ended up running the company. It was very destructive in not only Ed losing his life and how it affected Mary, children, family dynamics, but also the children's future in the company and that sort of thing as well.
In 1979, Joe Corbett was paroled. and he went to San Francisco only to return to Denver 2 days later, which was a violation of the terms of his release. He was sent back to prison. He was paroled again on December 12, 1980, at age 52. After serving only 18 and a half years, he returned to Denver, where the Coors family secretly kept close tabs on him.
The Coors family hired someone to watch him for years after that. They still didn't trust him with their family. I don't know why the Coors would think that. But, he'd already killed one Coors. Why give him another chance, I guess?
Joe Corbett lived in the Denver area for nearly 30 years. He was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and on August 24, 2009, he fatally shot himself. He was 82 years old. In a rare interview with the Denver Post in 1996, Corbett did make a few comments about the infamous Coors case.
I was a fugitive from California, and I had been in that area where Coors was kidnapped. I can see why so many people think I'm guilty, that it's an open and shut case, but it wasn't.
Mary Coors never remarried after her husband's death. She later suffered another devastating blow when her daughter Brooke died at age 26 from lymphoma. The tragedy of losing Ad to murder destroyed her once happy life.
She had a tough life afterward. Alcohol, hatred. People told me she was full of hate toward the person that did this. I think it just kind of ate her up inside. To me, that just reflects her love for her husband and her family.
Mary died at age 60 on July 26, 1975, from injuries suffered from falling down a flight of stairs at a friend's home. The ranch she had shared with Ad had been sold years before, and the family had long since returned to Denver. Bill Coors took over the Coors Company, living to age 100. Ad Coors' death was rarely, if ever, discussed, but its effect on the family was never forgotten.
The son had mentioned on a Christian broadcast that he lost his father to murder and his mother to alcoholism. So it was terrible. Because his family could have been a happy family. They had all the benefits that in life you would love, name recognition, power, money, good family. And this guy just stripped it all away.
What do you think about this case? Please comment below. And if you liked this story, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like and notification buttons, and let us know if there are cases you'd like us to cover.